Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today in what is the fourth episode of our bite-sized employability series. Today we are going to be looking at types of interviews, what you can expect and how to prepare for it. Because over the last couple of years, we've seen a big rise in different styles of interviews, different trends in terms of how we assess skills, competence and abilities and that side of things. And it's our objective today to try and give you some hints and tips that's really going to help you prepare for those interviews to be able to give the best account of yourselves as possible. Now, my name is Paul Hanrahan, and I'm part of the talent acquisition, the recruitment team here at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And I've been working with Enterprise for a particularly long time and in graduate recruitment for the best part of the last 15 years. So interviewing and assessing talent is certainly something that I'm well versed in and have spent a lot of time doing over a big chunk of my career. I'm also joined today by a very special guest, by one of our university partners, and I'd just like to hand over to Laura to say hello herself.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name's Laura Messenger. I'm a careers consultant currently working at Newcastle University. So I've been at Newcastle for about 6 months now, but been working in the careers sector for almost 7 years. So again, like Paul, well versed in interviews. So my role is to help students such as yourself to firstly work out what they want to do as a career. It's not always easy, but then also to help you get there. So a bit of interview coaching, top tips, feedback on applications and things like that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. And we are joined by one more person. So working away in the background, we've got my colleague, Graham Butler. Graham is going to be moderating the chat box. So as we go through, if you've got any questions for either myself or for Laura, if there's anything that you would like to know about the interviews, the type of interviews that maybe are used, please do pop them in the chat box. Graham will answer them if they're ones that can be answered quickly. Likewise, he will also put them to myself and Laura, almost as a panel Q&A, if it's something that sort of we feel is actually good for triggering discussion and an item that maybe needs to be covered. But let's move on and let's have a quick look at the first type of interviews that we're going to cover today. And we're going to look at competency interviews. And I'm sure by now, many of you have heard the term competency-based interview, skills-based interview. Well, what are they? Well, really kind of what they're doing is looking at your level of competence within a skill. And the way that we do that is we're looking for experiences and examples and situations that you've been in. So as we go through the webinar today, we are going to sort of try to give some examples and some hints and tips in terms of how to do it. And I'm going to pick on a few skills as we go through. And a good one to start with for competency-based interviewing is customer service. And one of the traditional questions that you might get asked in an interview could be, could you describe or could you tell me what makes great customer service? And hopefully your response would be something along the lines of attentive to the customer, good body language, open communication, suggesting ideas and alternatives, taking my time with the customer, making sure that I meet their needs, that kind of thing. That's a good example of an answer to that question as to what makes great customer service. But what have I learned about you there? All I've really learned from that example or from that answer that you've given me is that you know what makes great customer service. What you haven't done is you haven't given me any evidence of when you've actually delivered great customer service yourself. You've never shown me that you've actually been able to implement and actually action what you've just described as great service. So when we start to look at how we actually generate that evidence to whether you've got that skill within customer service, we use a style of interview questions called competency-based interview questions. And you can normally spot these coming a mile off because they always begin with, can you give me an example of, or can you tell me about a time when? So if we apply that to our customer service example again, the question that we ask from a competency standpoint, and I'll give you a bit of a hint and a tip now, that if you've applied to Enterprise, this is probably one of the first questions, if not the very first question that you will get asked in the recruiter interview with us. But it is, can you give me an example of when you have provided exceptional customer service to somebody? So what we're looking for here is for you to actually provide an example, for you to tell us a story, for you to take us on a journey with lots of detail and lots of information and actually provide evidence of when you have used that skill. So let's kind of take that now to our customer service example. So what we're hoping that you would do here is that you would actually then start to describe where you were, what you were doing, the steps that you took, and any successes or challenges that you encountered as you were going through that example. And you would actually start to complete the STAR. Okay, and this is a nice little acronym, and it's, I would dare to say, probably the first takeaway of the session is to have the STAR at the back of your mind. And the STAR simply stands for situation, task, action, and result. And this is how we want you to tackle those competency-based interview questions. So first of all, think about the situation. Set the scene. Where were you? What were you doing? Who else was involved? Give me all of the background that leads up to that example. Secondly, talk me through the task. What was the purpose of it? Why did you have to do it? What was the importance behind it? Then ultimately, you're moving into the really big chunk of the answer that you're going to give. And this is the important part. Explain what you did. What action did you take? And my big takeaway number 2 for you when you're starting to think about interviewing is always focus on the I, not the we. What did you do? Okay, I did. I took this process. I did this because this is what I did to resolve the problem. I want to know about I, not we. Okay, so what did you do specifically? And in that action, go into good detail, step by step. What did you do? How did you solve the problem? How did you hit your target? How did you deliver on your measurables? Were there any challenges along the way? How did you overcome those obstacles? What did you do to get past them? And then ultimately, at the end of this, what I want you to do is I want you to share an outcome with me. I want you to give me a result. And it could be just something simply as, did you hit your target? Yes or no? Was the customer satisfied? Yes or no? Did the team achieve their goal because of the communication and the processes that were put in place? But what was the outcome to it? So when you're answering those competency-based questions, always have that STAR at the back of your mind. Situation, task, action, and result. So let's apply it to that customer service example that we looked at right at the very outset of this webinar. And let's look at that question that we ask at Enterprise. So can you tell me about a time, or can you give me an example of when you provided exceptional service to somebody? So what I want you to do is go through a model like this, and I'll give you an example of an answer. So I was working at the supermarket at Tesco's on the green grocery department. It was a really busy Saturday morning. I was putting new stock out because a lot of customers had come in and had bought a lot of products and was having to top up the shelves. All of a sudden, a customer storms up to me and throws a lettuce at me, shouting and going, telling me that there's slugs or caterpillars in your lettuce and they're absolutely disgusted, and they're going to the newspapers about it. So the action that I took was straight away, I removed the customer from where there were other customers so as it wasn't creating an audience. I tried to calm them down. I let them vent. I listened. I immediately removed the offending item, offered to replace it with a substitute product. I offered them their money back, refund, a goodwill voucher. And ultimately, the customer then accepted my apologies, accepted the solution that I provided. They went away happy. I've been working at Tesco's now for a couple of years, and every Saturday morning, the same customer comes back in. We know each other on first name terms, and they say, oh, hi, Paul, any slugs in the lettuce this week? Little bit of a laugh and joke, but I've retained their business. They're now a loyal customer. Now, that is just a very simple, very quick overview as to how to complete that STAR, how to deal with one of those competency-based questions. And what I have learned about you using that example of questioning is that, first of all, you understand what great customer service is, because you spoke to me about the steps that you took, the options that you gave to the customer, the thought processes that you gave to where the customer was and why they were angry. So you demonstrated knowledge of customer service. But more importantly, what you've done is you've actually demonstrated that you have used that skill and that you have had a positive outcome with it. Now, it doesn't really matter whether that outcome is positive or negative when you're looking at competency-based interviews, because if you didn't get a positive outcome, if that customer actually stormed off and they were still unhappy and they never shopped at Tesco's again, or maybe you had to get your manager in to resolve the problem because they were more skilled within that sort of area, well, what did you learn from that experience? What could you do differently? If you were in that situation again, how would you handle it going forward? So this is the thing to think about when you're completing that STAR. So don't think that it always has to be a positive outcome. It can have a negative result as well, but be able to demonstrate applied learning, be able to demonstrate that you've reflected upon it and that you could do or have done something differently in the future. Now, there is a different style of interview questions, which is certainly on the increase at the moment, and that is strength-based interviewing. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague for this call, Laura, who's going to take you through strength-based interviews. So thinking about the customer service example again, we've already gone through what good customer service is. You've given me an example of when you've used that skill. Now, Laura is going to take you through as to whether that skill is actually a strength, whether you actually enjoyed using that skill, and look more at the emotional sort of connection and tied into those skills as well. So Laura, over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, as Paul said, it's a slightly different type of interview that you might come across in terms of strengths-based interviews. So the key for these interviews is in the name, strength. They are looking at your strengths rather than specific examples of experiences like the competency-based interviews would do. So in that way, a strength-based interview might be beneficial for those of you who don't have quite as much work experience to draw upon. Now, these interviews, they are becoming increasingly unpopular with employers because it allows them to get a really genuine insight into your personality so that they can then look at your potential fit to the role and the company. And that's useful for the employer, as the theory goes that if you're in a role that really plays to your strengths, that you're really enthusiastic and motivated by, you are likely to be happier in that role and therefore perform better and are likely to stay with the company for longer. So again, using the customer service example, there's a bit of an analogy of the kind of computer says no situation. So for example, you could have absolutely years of working in customer service, you could have all those basic skills there, but if you're not really bothered, you're not motivated by helping the customer, you're not going to do the role as well as someone who is enthusiastic about it. So that's why it's really important to think about in a strengths-based interview what they are looking for. And they're looking for two key things in your answers, and that is capability and engagement. So capability is just looking for, do you have that strength? Are you able to do the job in that way? But the engagement side is actually looking at how energized or drained you are when you're using that strength. So they can really tell this from your answer to the question by looking at things like your body language or your tone of voice, because when we're enthusiastic about something, it comes across, we're more animated. And that's a kind of top tip when answering these types of questions, is to make sure that you are giving really authentic and genuine answers. You're not kind of making it up. You're not trying to seem enthusiastic about something when you're not, because that will really show through when you're answering these questions. So the type of questions that you might come across in strength-based are slightly different from the competency ones. Often they might be posed as statements. So for example, it could be something about, tell me about some activities that you really enjoy doing, or tell me about the achievement that you're most proud of. Other types of questions might be things like, what energizes you, or what gets done first on your to-do list, and what never gets done. So they're starting to explore a bit more behind you, what motivates you, what do you enjoy doing, and in that way they're starting to learn about your strengths. Now, it is a little bit harder to prepare for these type of questions than competency ones, where you can kind of pick out all the examples, but you can do that by doing some self-reflection. So really looking at yourself and thinking, actually, what do I enjoy doing? Where do my strengths lie? What have I done on my course, for example, that I really excel at and enjoy doing? But also doing some research into the role and the company. So I always say, get your highlighter out, go through that job description, really look at it under a microscope and pick out what are the strengths required for that role. And when you're researching the company, look at other people that work there. What strengths do they have? And really try and tie that back to yourself and your own strengths, because if you're aware of what you need for the role and where your strengths are, you're going to really do well in some of these questions. And I would recommend having a look. There's loads of kind of top tips on websites and things like that, loads of example strengths questions, just so you can get a bit of a feel for what they are so that they don't throw you off. So a few kind of quick tips on the strength-based one there. What we're now going to move on to do is actually have a quick look at the different formats of interviews. So we're actually going to have a look at some video interview tips.
Now, when we were putting this webinar together, we wanted to look at the different types of interview that were out there, but we also wanted to really kind of acknowledge the way that the world of interviewing has changed because of the pandemic and over the last couple of years. And what we have seen is a massive increase in video interviews and different ways of actually assessing those skills by a 12-by-9-inch laptop screen. So really kind of wanted to touch on this, give you some hints and tips, talk through sort of why we're using them so much and sort of how video interviewing is changing as we move forward. So the reason that they exist at the moment is fairly obvious. They were born about through necessity, as most innovation is, and obviously off the back of the pandemic. Now, as we've kind of got used to this and doing interviews and skill sessions and webinars and all sorts of things over platforms like Zoom and Teams and Google Meets, we have also realized that there are benefits to them and that there is a lot around efficiency and being able to kind of cut costs, not just from the business's perspective, but also from the candidate's perspective as well, because all of a sudden you're not having to travel to London to do that interview for the big graduate job that you've applied for. And we feel certainly sort of for the next few years, this is going to be the norm. I don't think video interviews are going to go away entirely. I think that a lot of graduate recruiters and placement roles will still have a video conversation at some stage in their process. So with that in mind, it's something that you've got to start to get more comfortable with, and it's something that you've got to make sure that you are familiar with when you're getting ready for those interviews. And the first big sort of tip that I would give for this is to check your technology. There are so many different platforms out there that provide this as a facility. Every organization may use a slightly different one. There's so many providers out there that require you to download an app. There's others that will allow you to do it off a desktop. And so you've just got to make sure that your technology and the device that you are using is going to be capable of actually dealing with those platforms that are being used. There's nothing I like more than when I've interviewed somebody, when I've done a telephone interview with them and I've sent them an invite for that virtual face-to-face interview, that no sooner has the email left my outbox that I see a little pop-up in the bottom corner telling me that Laura Messenger has just started the Teams meeting. Because what I know that they've done is they have gone in, they've received the email, they've clicked the link, and they are making sure that it works. So I know that on the day when I'm interviewing Laura, there isn't going to be any of those technical problems. There isn't going to be an issue because at this stage, hopefully Laura will come back to me and say, yes, it works well, or no, it doesn't. Can you help me, please? Now, with this in mind, there is something that we've seen an increase in as well. And there is this concern around digital poverty. Okay, and that maybe people don't have as good a bandwidth, as good a broadband. Maybe they don't have an up-to-date device that would allow them to actually download the most up-to-date software or app. Now, this is absolutely fine, and this is acceptable, and this is understandable, and many employers appreciate this, and many employers are able to make accommodations and adjustments to do that stage of the interview in a different way. All that we would require you to do is actually to reach out to us as an interviewer, as a recruiter, and to have that conversation with us and to say, actually, I am struggling to run the software, I'm struggling to run the platform. Can you please give me some guidance, some help on it? Because you would hope that the people that use it every single day are the experts and they would be able to help from there. So don't be afraid to ask for a bit of guidance. Don't be afraid to ask for a little bit of support if you need it through the interview process. Now, in terms of the actual interview itself, what I would say is, other than checking the technology side of things, what is best practice for a video interview is best practice in a normal interview. They still are one and the same. You still got to think about your body language. You've got to think about your posture. You've got to think about what your hands are doing, your eye contact. You've got to remember to smile. You've got to remember to engage in a conversation. Remember that it's two-way. An interview should never just be me as an interviewer firing a question at you, getting an answer, firing a question, getting an answer. It should be two-way. It should be conversational. And I always say to my candidates that if they get the best out of me as an interviewer by engaging me in a conversation and making it feel personable and two-way, then I will get the best out of them as a candidate, because I am bought into that conversation. I am bought into them as a person, and I would want to find out more, and I would engage back as well. So it really does need to be a two-way process. Now, in terms of times and those sorts of things, this is something that I get asked a lot. Traditionally, for a face-to-face interview, you would probably rock up at the employer's premises 10, 15, 20 minutes before the interview is due to arrive. You sit in reception, you'd sit there all nervous, maybe you'd say hello to the receptionist and have a glass of water, a quick trip to the loo, whatever it might be. Obviously, if you're logging into a Teams or a Zoom call, 15 minutes is a little bit overkill. It doesn't take that long to kind of get into the meeting and get set up. So what I would say is just a rule of thumb for any of these video interviews when they're going to be a live face-to-face virtual interview is to log in anywhere around about 2 to 5 minutes before the video starts, just so as the interviewer knows that you're there and that you're waiting, gives you time to compose yourself, to get yourself ready, to make sure that your notes are in place and to get and go from there. And that brings me to my next point. The beauty with video interviews, with virtual interviews, is you can have notes. Have them resting on the desk in front of you. Have them resting on the keyboard. Have them there as a point of reference, just a few bullet points of key things that you feel you want to get into the conversation to jog your memory. Because let's be all honest, when all of us go into interviews, we're nervous, we forget to say things, we walk out of that interview and think, why didn't I give that example to that question? It would have been perfect, but we always forget to do it. So have it on a little bit of bullet pointed notes just in front of you. Don't try to write out an entire script. Don't try to kind of absolutely be prepared and scripted for the interview that's coming up, but just a few points that you want to make sure that you get into the conversation. And then as you go through the interview, take your time. Don't be afraid to allow a little bit of thinking time, a bit of silence. I know silence on a video call feels awful. It feels uncomfortable. You're wondering if the person is on mute or whether they've frozen, but don't worry, just to allow a few seconds to compose yourself, to structure your answer, and to ensure that you answer the question that's been asked of you. And this is going to be the really important piece in that interview, is it should be you doing at least 70% of the talking. Okay, so think about how you are going to sell yourself. Think about how you're going to present your skills, your experiences, and what you have done. And the last thing that I want to give as just a tip with the video interviews is just think about what people can see behind you. Okay, are you fortunate like myself where my setup allows me to have a blank wall behind me and I'm well lit from all angles? Do you need to think about blurring the background? Do you need to put a set background in? Are you going to have housemates wandering past an open door in their underwear when you're interviewing? But think about what we can see as interviewers behind you. Think about where you're going to set yourself up to do that interview as well. Make sure that everything that you're doing sells you in the best light possible, that you create that great first impression, just like you would if you walked into an interview and you shook that person's hand and you were trying to create that great first impression in those first 30 seconds as well. So that's a bit of overview in terms of videos interviews, those virtual, those real life interviews. But I know that there's people on this call probably thinking, are they going to cover pre-recorded interviews? Because I tell you what, I don't know what to do with them. I'm nervous about them. I'm worried about them. They're not going to allow me to really get my point across. Well, the answer to that question is yes, we are. And I'm going to hand you back to my colleague, Laura, who's going to take you through some hints and tips around those pre-recorded interviews that, let's be honest, none of us like. So Laura, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Paul said, there are, I guess, two types of those videos interviews. There's the live ones where you've got a person on the other side, whereas there are pre-recorded interviews where there's no person there and you're actually recording your answers that someone is going to view later. So they have been around for a while. The technology's been there, but they are starting to kind of go on the rise and become more popular, probably particularly because of the pandemic. And quite often these are starting to replace telephone interviews that employers might have used previously. So what happens here, you'll kind of log on to the software and you'll be presented with a pre-recorded question. So it might be that someone from the organisation has recorded themselves saying the question, or you might be presented with a written question on the screen. And what you'll do is you will usually have a set amount of thinking time. So they'll show you the question, you will have maybe 15, 30 seconds to have a quick process, think what you might want to talk about, and then a set time to actually record your answer. So perhaps kind of 60 seconds or so to answer your question. Most of the time you probably won't have the opportunity to re-record your answer as well, although there are a couple of employers that do offer that opportunity. I think the key here is to kind of practice, because as Paul said, it's something we really hate doing, is kind of recording ourselves. So most providers will have a section where you can practice kind of a question or two, just so you get more familiar with the setup, how it works, and just to check that you're doing it right. So I definitely recommend using that. But if you can do beforehand, it could be as simple as getting your kind of laptop or your phone even, and practice recording an answer yourself, because in that way you can then play it back and see how you come across in camera, because sometimes you can pick up on things like your body language. Were you moving too much? Were you not making eye contact with the camera? Your tone of voice, were you speaking too quickly? It can be really beneficial to have a look back. If you have spoken to kind of your university career service as well, quite often they might have a platform that you can practice on, or you can actually record and go and show your video to your careers advisor, and they can give you some feedback there. So it is it is something that people do get stressed about, and I think a lot of people avoid doing the practice beforehand. So I would say try and overcome that, because if you're just practicing to show yourself, that's going to be less stressful. You can delete the video, but it just gives you that chance to try those questions out. And I think that is a point that some employers have said that people fall down on, because they get overly worried. And it's a lot of the same top tips as with a live interview. Look at the camera, make sure you're answering the question fully, being aware of the time, and using the other tips we've talked about today. So that's the key, I think, to just practice those. And if you get told who the provider is of the software as well, you can always have a look and see if they've got any extra platforms you can use to practice as well. So I think we're just going to round off with a few kind of last top tips now from the session. Should I take the first?
Yeah, if you want to kick us off, Laura. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the key, I've talked about it in the strength-based interview. The top thing is know yourself. The interview is their chance to find out more about you. You've given them everything on paper, they just want to find out more. So it's really important to do that self-reflection, know what your skills are, what your experiences are, what your strengths are, and really relate those to the role. So like I said, go through that job description, highlight all the skills they're looking for, and reflect on your own experiences. What examples have you got for that? And just know how you stand out from other candidates.
Fantastic. Do you want to take the second one as well, Laura, and I'll do the last one?
Yeah. Okay. Compose yourself, I think, is referring really to trying to manage those nerves, because interviews, like I said, can be kind of really nerve-wracking, stressful situations. So thinking how you best manage your nerves. So I always try to say, actually, an interview is a two-way process. It's not just about them assessing you. It's your opportunity to ask them questions. If you get to go there, great, have a look around. Is it an environment that you want to fit into? And in that way, it takes a little bit of that pressure off yourself. If you're someone who gets really nervous, think about how you could best manage those nerves. Could it be simply having a glass of water there so you can take a sip, calm yourself down, give yourself some thinking time? Do you need to count slowly to 10 in your head? How do you manage those nerves? Because some nerves are great, because they show you're really interested and enthusiastic, but too many nerves will really impact the interview. So really think how you can manage those to perform best.
Perfect, fantastic. And then the last thing from me is sell yourself. And this is the really important piece of any interview. And you really need to, from knowing yourself and composing yourself, believe that you are great. All of you have got a great skill set that you develop at university, in your part-time jobs, society involvement, sports, extracurricular. Every single one of you has the type of skill set that makes you employable. There's a reason that my job and Laura's jobs exist, because companies want to hire graduates and placement students with the skills that you have. If you believe that and you walk into an interview and you sell yourself and you talk us through all of the great things that you've achieved in your life and your career to now, you will put yourself in a great position to be successful within that interview. So don't be afraid to kind of blow your own trumpet when you're in those interviews. One of the things that frustrates me more than anything is a candidate says, "Oh, I don't want to blow my own trumpet." Well, it's an interview. You kind of need to, so sell yourself, really believe that what you've achieved is of value and that we want to hear about it. But that's everything that myself and Laura have got from a content standpoint that we wanted to cover today. We will just hand it over just quickly for a couple of minutes. Are there any questions from the floor? Is there anything that anyone would like to know more about or would like to ask myself or Laura at all?
So we have had a question come through, which was, I've applied for a role with Enterprise. If I'm successful at the video interview, what can we expect at the final stage, which is the branch visit?
Okay, perfect. So better not hand that one over to you, Laura. Maybe I ought to take this one. So perfect, brilliant. Well, thanks for the question, and that's great that you're in the process with us and that you're starting to look forward to the next stage. Now, for me personally, that branch visit has always been the most important stage of our recruitment process. And the reason for this is you get to go into one of our branches and you actually get to really get a feel for the company culture, get to see the role in action, get to meet the team that you're potentially going to be working with. And it is a great opportunity for you to make sure that we're right for you as much as we're assessing to make sure that you're right for us and you've got the skills that we look for. So this really is a two-way piece. And when you're at the branch, you'll sit with the team, they'll talk you through the role, they'll talk you through the expectations, they'll show you the goals that they work with, they'll talk you through the training folder and how the career progresses. And they will be very open and honest with you. They will tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly for working for Enterprise. Hopefully they'll remember to sell it as well. Hopefully they'll tell you what they do enjoy and how they overcome some of those challenges. But nothing gets hidden or sugar-coated at this stage. You will find that as you go through the interview process with us here at Enterprise, that we are a very open, a very transparent employer. So we're very open to talking about all elements of the job. And the reason I say that branch visit is so important is you should come out of that branch very firmly in one of two camps. And we want you hopefully in camp number one. And you come out of there and we'll ring you up afterwards and say, "Hey, it's Paul from Enterprise. Just spoken to the area manager, the branch manager. They loved what you had to say. We'd like to offer you a job." And your response is, "Paul, I loved it. I love the environment. I love the people that I met. I love what I saw. I'm in." Alternatively, you could be the other side and it's actually, "You know what, Paul, I had a good experience. The people were really friendly, but I've realized it's not the environment that I particularly enjoy working in, or it's not the type of role that I'm looking for at this stage. Thanks, but no thanks." And that isn't always a bad thing, because it means that maybe that you've realized that you're looking for something else or your strengths lie elsewhere as well. But you should be pretty firmly one or the other is what I say. Now, in terms of some hints and tips for that branch interview, I always try to keep it very simple. Interact, so engage with the team, ask lots of questions, get involved in the conversations, the discussions that are going on. If you get the opportunity to say hello to a customer, do so. Don't be afraid to engage with the customers that are coming in as well. And just really go in with an open mind and just ask questions that are important to you. Find out about everything that we do and how we do it. There is nothing that is off the table. There is nothing that's taboo. There is nothing that you cannot ask whilst you're there. The team are well prepared. They're well trained. They will engage you in those conversations. And the last thing really with it is I would say to try and demonstrate your commitment. So when you're actually in the one-on-one part of the day, the interview with the area or the branch manager, yes, we'll be talking about your skills, but we will be talking about your strengths, your commitment, your career objectives, where you want to get to, what it is that you want to achieve and how you're going to get there. But certainly that branch visit should be a very enjoyable and a very informative experience for you. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, we've had one more question come through, which is it okay to ask questions in an interview? So we'll say during the interview, but also at the end of an interview as well.
Laura?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah.
So absolutely, I'd say an almost guaranteed part of an interview. At the end of the interview, they will ask you if you've got any questions for them as an employer. So it's a really good way to prepare, to think of what questions you might ask them. And I think it's looking for genuine questions that you would like to know the answer to. So try not to ask any questions that they've already told you about, maybe in the preamble to the interview, or that you could easily have found out during your research, because that will show maybe you haven't done as much research. But think, what do you genuinely want to know? It could be, well, if you are successful in the role, what are the training opportunities? Where could you kind of be? Or it could be even more personal questions about that that help you to get an insight into whether you want to work there, such as what's their favorite part about the job? Well, what do they kind of most enjoy about working for the company? Because that can give you insight. In terms of during the interview, I guess it depends on the situation and kind of where it's appropriate. It could be asking questions such as clarifying. Maybe you misunderstood the question. That's absolutely fine to say, sorry, could you just repeat the question, or kind of clarify there? So I think it's looking at the most appropriate timing there if you were to ask the questions. I think if it's more exploratory questions where you're finding out more about the company, it might be more appropriate to leave those towards the end. But always come up with kind of a couple of questions that you'd like to ask at the end of the interview.
The last screen that I've left up now is just all of our different social media channels that Enterprise have. If you would like to engage with us post-event, please do look us up on whichever your preferred platform or social media channel is. There is some great content out there of all of the things we're doing as a business, some of the things we're doing in the community and from a diversity, inclusion and equity standpoint. And also you can see some of the things that we're doing as individuals on a very, very local level as well. So please do engage with us post-webinar. But otherwise, all that is left for me to say is thank you to those of you that have joined us this morning. Thank you, Graham, for facilitating and moderating the questions for us. And most importantly, Laura, thank you for joining us as a subject matter expert and a guest to our session this morning. So we can't make any of this happen without our university partners. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.